Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Raymond Yeung.
And I'm Edna Tse. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Violence erupts on the streets of Tamar as protesters clash with police to demand scrapping of extradition amendments.
Chaos leaves LegCo in disarray, with President of Legislature forced at the late hour to cancel today's session on amendment bill.
Police chief defends use of force but rules out curfew as teachers' union calls for strike in support of protests.
Defiant protesters remain on the streets around the government in Tamar tonight, vowing to stay there until the government scraps the controversial extradition amendments.
More than 20 people have been injured in the unrest, but the government is standing firm. For a first-hand glimpse of the situation, we'll cross over to Michelle Ng at Tamar. Michelle.
Thank you, Edna. Well, now I'm standing at Harcourt Road, where this place earlier it was flooded with protesters. But right now, they are all being pushed back to the area behind me near Central. So in this afternoon, at least 22 people were injured in today's scuffles. While I was walking from the Legislative Council, Harcourt Road has been cleared right now, with broken umbrellas and protesters' belongings lying on the ground. Aftermath of this afternoon's clash between the police and the crowds, 22 people were injured, with one in serious condition. The second reading is cancelled today by President Andrew Leung, but Carrie Lam's government stood firm on not retrieving the amendment bill. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Michelle. Tamar came to a standstill today as protesters clashed with police, who resorted to tear gas and rubber bullets in a bid to disperse the crowds.
The violence was the worst since tear gas was also fired during the Occupy protests 5 years ago.
A standoff lasting several hours finally spilled into open confrontation at 3 p.m. when a group of protesters, donning helmets and masks, charged towards police outside the Legislative Council complex. Officers doused them with pepper spray and beat them back with batons. Police had the upper hand in equipment, but they were severely outnumbered and were forced to retreat at one stage. Reinforcements who were called in fired rubber bullets and beanbag rounds to hold their ground. With the situation quickly deteriorating, tear gas canisters were fired to disperse the crowds at around 4 p.m. White smoke filled the air around LegCo and the adjacent government headquarters compound as officers escalated their use of force to tackle the increasingly violent protests. The atmosphere was just as tense inside the LegCo complex, where officers stood ready to fend off the crowds in case they broke through the cordon outside. An officer who looked to be in great pain had to receive first aid on the floor, apparently suffering from the impact of tear gas. Elite Tactical Unit officers, known as the Raptor Unit, were armed with shotguns carrying non-lethal rounds to hunt down protesters. In scenes reminiscent of the 2014 Occupy pro-democracy protests, umbrella-wielding demonstrators filled the streets near the government compound in Tamar. The tear gas prompted many to retreat to Harcourt Road, the main thoroughfare connecting eastern and western Hong Kong Island. Some who couldn't escape the irritating chemical had to rinse their eyes with water. Police then began extending their cordon to push back demonstrators away from the area. Officers hoisted banners warning they could deploy tear gas. Some protesters picked up the canisters and hurled them back towards police. Many braved the impact of tear gas and were determined to stay put. The only time they gave way was when an ambulance rushed past. Even paramedics had to put on gas masks as they stretchered injured people away from the scene. The sporadic clashes lasted into the evening, with the massive police operation likely to continue overnight.
Protesters had reportedly given the government a 3 p.m. deadline to retract the controversial bill, but they failed to persuade officials.
As the chaos worsened, the president of LegCo was forced to cancel the second reading of the bill, which had been scheduled to have its second reading this morning. With so much going on outside the Legislative Council building, the second reading of the Fugitive Law Amendment Bill could not begin at 11 a.m. as scheduled. LegCo President Andrew Leung announced the meeting would be postponed, but did not specify a time. It is believed the meeting could not start because lawmakers, especially those from the pro-Beijing camp, had trouble reaching the venue, which was besieged by protesters. Pan-democratic lawmakers continued to urge Chief Executive Carrie Lam to withdraw the bill and to step down.
Well, the only sensible option is for the Chief Executive to openly say to withdraw the bill. And our President, well, should immediately cancel the meeting, or at least to in his power, to adjourn the meeting for, say, 10 days, so that the government can have more